And this week's guest is Irene Kopelman. Welcome, Irene, to the living room.
Thank you.
Visual artist, researcher, specific kind of visual artist and researcher. And I think this first track definitely gives us an insight into that, or a first hint of it. What were we listening to?
So we were listening to the sound in the forest in a place called Barro Colorado Island, BCI, which is part of the Smithsonian in Panama. So it's a Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. And
they're based there.
They're based there. They have different stations, different research stations. This is one of them. The sound we just heard is from the archive of the Smithsonian, actually. And I spent quite a bit of time drawing lianas in that forest.
Lianas.
Lianas.
A very particular kind of vine?
Yeah, exactly. That's what lianas are.
I definitely have some questions about this plant. But before we get to that, the Smithsonian has been there for how long, doing research there?
The Smithsonian has been there for, I guess, about 100 years, probably.
Okay. And is there, to your knowledge, or did you inquire about sort of their initial reason to go there and do research and how that sort of evolved into what they do now?
Yes, I mean, the reason for which it's interesting there in terms of biology is because Panama is very thin in the map, which means that the species have moved from the north to the south
more easily
through that little bridge. So that's why it's interesting in terms of biology. And some species have kind of stay in one side of the continent, some stay in the other, some cross. So it's an interesting place to look at the biology. That's how they ended up there, and also there's of course a history, that the United States ran the canal for many years, and at some point they left. Yeah. So the Smithsonian has to do with that kind of history also.
And I imagine it's also very rich in species, and this being one of the reasons. It is tropical or subtropical?
Yeah, it's tropical.
Tropical. Different than a temperate climate. There must be a lot of things to study.
Yeah, a lot of things to study. And they have different stations. So they have Barro Colorado. They have also stations in the sea, in both sides of the sea. And they have other stations in the other forest. So they do many different things.
And so how do you end up there? How do you and your artistic practice end up there?
So the first time, I've been there quite a number of times. Actually, I want to get back. But the first time was through a grant called SARF, which is a grant by the Smithsonian for artists to work with the collections. And I didn't want to work with the collection, but I wanted to see how scientists work in the field. So I've been working here in collections for some years with entomology, fossils, etc. And at some point I got curious to see how those things end up in those collections.
So how the scientists themselves operate and what kind of processes they use, systems of research.
Yeah, exactly. And collect. Like, how do you collect the butterfly? I mean, it's quite a job. Or how you collect lianas, or how things enter that system of classification later, eventually.
And
so
that's
the first,
sorry, go ahead.
No, the first trip was that I spent about 2 weeks following people around. I went to the different stations, talked to different scientists, walk with them, try to understand how they work. That was the first time.
And in these conversations, is it, because I'm going to ask about your practice in just a moment, but in these conversations, do you realize that there is a great difference in language, vocabulary, in the understanding of those surroundings? Does that come up often?
I mean, it depends. I mean, they more relaxed about using words that for us we are more stiff about it, like beauty.
Duty?
Beauty.
Oh, beauty, okay.
So they're quite free with those things. They talk about it with no historical burden, as we do as artists.
But they do see the things that they work with and within as they do assign it aesthetic quality then.
They do, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, there is a lot of intuition, there is a lot of passion.
So that notion of objectivity that rests above the scientific process isn't always the case.
It comes later, or probably comes at the same time, but it's not that they don't have other interest in things. They do see the beauty
and so it's also this sociological level, I guess, that you're interested in.
Yeah, and this is what allows communication also for me with them. I mean, somewhere we are kind of in a very similar page in that stage. Later, the work is very different, but when you work in the field, it's not so different.
I would describe your own practice as often incorporating that scientific language in its presentation, but also how it's applied later again in your publications, for example. Is that very? Is that what you take from these experiences, perhaps in working with science, into art, or is it because you've always found yourself to be sort of on the balance between the two?
I think it's both. I mean, it transpires into because I spend a lot of time in those environments, a lot, probably more than in our environment. So
our being the artistic one.
Yeah, totally. So I very, very often I'm immersed in those environments, so it kind of transpires into my practice for sure. And it's also an organic, in terms of display, for me it's an organic way of displaying practice like that. So it's very systematic, it's very programmatic. I have questions, I answer them through drawings. So there is a time involved in that. So in a way it's like a natural consequence of a system of working, let's say.
With a linearity to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I work, normally I create for myself like protocols, which are somehow questions that have to do with drawing.
Yeah.
And then I exhaust them, sort of.
Yeah.
And that I like to bring that into the display also. So it has to do with I don't apply a display form into the shows normally, but I try to let the process set up
within the context of a show, for want of a better word.
Exactly.
And so this track that we heard, Howler Monkeys.
Yeah.
In Panama. You didn't record it yourself, I imagine. You don't work that much with sound when you're on site. Yeah,
I'm not, but I did not. But I think this was an interesting proposition to do this, because it made me realize how much I do get affected by the sound environment. Because when you invited me, I immediately started thinking about those sounds that kind of enter the process, because it's so strong, as you might have heard. I mean, you trying to draw. I normally try to draw. I'm normally alone. Yeah. And I spend many hours. So to hear those sounds, it really enters your imagination. It's not that you're sitting there and you kind of detach from the sound.
Yeah. And why this one? Because for you, it's perhaps such a strong and clear sort of indication of the jungle, of a jungular. I don't know if that's a word. Sorry, but sort of environment.
I that's the sound I heard. So that's recorded in the area where I was drawing. Okay. So it was it's actually constant. You fall asleep with it. You wake up with it. You walk and it's there, and you're sitting and drawing and you hear it. Yeah. And then you deal with it, because sometimes it takes a while not to be scared.
So the howler monkey specifically.
Yeah, or whatever produces a sound in the forest.
Yeah, if you hear that for the first time.
Yeah, when you hear it first time, you have no idea. Someone explains you what it is, and eventually relax. But it's a very strong environment.
And so I imagine you're sitting. I'm sorry to ask such practical things, but I'm just curious about the setting. On the ground, on a chair. Do you have a tent?
So it changes.
How much paper do you bring? What technique do you work with?
No, those questions for me are interesting, because that's what makes it different to work in those environments. So it depends, and it changes a lot depending on the setups and the complications of the season and the environment. So in that particular place, there are a lot of how you call those insects that suck your blood? The
mosquitoes.
No, not the mosquitoes. The one that get hooked to you.
Ticks.
So there are a lot of ticks,
Okay.
which is not my favorite insect. So what I would do is to put a huge piece of plastic, like quite huge, like 3x3 kind of thing, and then an unfoldable chair on top of it.
Yeah.
And then I would sit there. I work in other forests where the mosquitoes were unbearable, so I had a mosquito kind of tent around me, like portable, that I would put in between trees. But in this particular forest, the issue were more the ticks.
And this is the Lianas that you were studying.
Yeah.
Just say, I did some looking up, some research on it myself. A linea is a long-stemmed woody vine that is rooted in the soil at ground level, and it uses trees as well as other means of vertical support to climb up to the canopy in search of direct sunlight. It reads a little bit like a greedy plant.
It's a very greedy plant. It's very smart.
Yeah.
So basically, what it does is doesn't use the energy to have a trunk. So it uses the tree's energy, so it goes faster and takes the light. So it's actually quite a mean plant, and it's quite interesting, and it creates really weird shapes because it finds ways to climb. So it creates super strange forms, which for me are interesting.
Because there is no fastened form for it. It isn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to go through other trees, and so it creates very intricate shapes that are incredible.
More different than the vines we could imagine. Let's call it a European context.
Yeah, it's a lot thicker, and everything in the tropics is like kind of crazy. So it goes. Yeah, it's just very alive. It goes quicker.
You can almost see it grow in a way.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, the ecosystems in the forest are crazy. Like from one year to the other, if something fall, it's what they call the forest gap, and then it's gone really, really super quick. It's crazy.
I heard that the lineas do have a positive function in that sense, that they also offer a certain advantaged transit for certain animals, either through the lineas themselves, like ants, they can easily get around by going up through the top and down again.
Yeah. No, now also they're studying because they also have leaves, and so they also have processes of photosynthesis. So now they're trying to measure how if they do something good also in those terms. But they're also the symptoms, basically. I mean, they're when the forest is being disturbed. If you have a pristine forest, you don't have lianas. So it's a sign of something that has been burned, the forest has been burned, or agriculture. So it's a measure.
Interesting. And and you come to know this from your own research, but also in the conversations with the scientists that are working alongside you?
Yeah, exactly. I work with a person called Stefan Schnitzer, and he works with lianas. He runs some very big projects monitoring how they grow, how they affect the tree, very, very long term. So they measure everything.
Because they also play a role in the future of carbon offset and things like this.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. And it changed a lot, apparently.
It gets in the way, basically, of regenerating carbon dioxide into oxygen because of its quick, smart, greedy nature.
Yeah, I mean, eventually the trees die.
Yeah.
I mean, it can happen. It can go that way.
Sunlight.
And so if they die, it's
And so the urgency of the scientist is there to understand this process and to see where science, as it often does, it can tap into it, perhaps alter it, put it to the hand of betterment, or find some technique or application for it. And you're there looking at the way it grows, its speed, the shapes it can take, its textures, so the kind of materiality it has.
Yeah. And it's never, I mean, I normally spend quite some time with the scientists first, before I decide my own protocols. So I first try to understand how they work, what do they look at. I try to get a grip. Okay. And then I slowly define my own protocols, and they're quite unuseful for them.
For them?
Yeah. So okay. Normally I end up looking at something that it kind of didn't matter.
To them?
To them.
Okay.
That's
Can you give us one example? I'm just curious.
Well, with the lianas, it was actually crazy because I started working, and then I always show my work to them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I didn't look at the one part that is relevant to their studies, because that's my call didn't take me there. So
Yeah.
I was very interested in the patterns,
Yeah.
and the shapes, and how they find their way, and try to avoid looking at the floor. I didn't look at where they root,
Ah,
and I
right.
didn't look at trees. Actually, I was not interested in the trees.
Yeah.
So the trees kind of remind ghostly, sort of.
Yeah.
So it's always funny to find out that at the end it's very different.
And in your drawings, often you leave that sort of void around it. It heightens the understanding of it as a scientific documentation somehow, or register, because of the white that you often have around on these drawings. It really does somehow make it removed, and you concentrate on what you see. But that abstraction from natural phenomenon to scientific interest to artistic interpretation, is there something you could add to that in that process? Do I even say that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, for me, my questions are completely connected to drawing.
Okay.
Like how to draw, how to frame, like very old questions of drawing. Very, like I think people drawing made themselves those questions for centuries. How to draw, what the window you create, how you create a window, how you look, how you scale. So those are the questions I always have wherever I sit.
But in this case, very, very specific to certain places and certain things. We're going to take a little trip to another place. How far away is this? Because it's also in Panama.
Yeah, it's also in Panama. It's another research station called Bocas del Toro. It's more like, they do more like sea studies. I'll tell you later more.
No howler monkeys in this one. A specific kind of bird? Do you know what that was? No.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's not your specialty.
No, I don't look at the birds. I like them,
but this was a specific context.
Yeah, this was in so I was here. It's a creek in the Bocas del Toro. So Bocas del Toro had a sea.
Yeah.
And then I was working with mangroves. So I was trying to find the right distance to the mangroves to draw.
The right distance?
Yeah, so because that's also important if you make drawings. So you have to find a good viewpoint, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So if I would be in the open sea, for example, I had to be in a boat.
Yeah.
So if I would be in the open sea, the boat moves a lot.
Sure.
So those kind of things really matter in my practice. So basically what we did was to find a little creek. And that's where I started making the drawings, and those sounds are from there.
There's a picture of you in one of your publications where you're in this boat. As you said before, now you're thinking about the sounds of places and maybe also the rhythms in general. Small waves, the birds indeed, the buzzing of mosquitoes. So with this understanding of your surroundings, does it change a lot when it's mangroves and it's a boat? It's kind of a strange question, but I'm trying to get an understanding of the theater, I suppose, of being there in the jungle and doing the research as an artistic endeavor. Because art for many centuries has traveled with science to record things and interpret it in such a way that it becomes more than science alone. As you say, scientists also understand their surroundings in terms of beauty. And yet there's something off about both of you being there.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this is what I'm asking about, how conscious you and in conversations with the scientists you all are about this.
Yeah. So for me, actually that's why I do it in a way. I could more comfortably at home, of course, and then you're not bitten by mosquitoes, or in this case were chitras, which are really annoying also.
Oh, right, yeah.
So those things for me are very, very important, because I think it creates a different way of drawing. It triggers different things in the drawing. So if you're in a boat, or if you're in a jungle, or if you're in different environments, it creates a different constrictions to the work, and that creates different responses also. So I think it pushes the process into completely different scenarios than what someone, me, or anyone else can do in a controlled environment.
And could you call that like an added reality, or would it be considered in terms of truer, more objective?
I don't know if it's truer, and maybe it's even less objective, but it's maybe it's truer. I don't know if that's a word, but it's an experience. So the experience determines the way I draw.
Yeah.
And that's very, very different. I don't know if it's better or worse. It's just.
But so, from your understanding of what artistic practice is for you, to be able to translate that curiosity that you have can only be done by being there, in that sense.
Yeah, for me, yes. Because I just, it's not about producing an image for me. Yeah. It's not about having a drawing of a mangrove. It's not that I want to have a drawing of a mango. I just want to understand those mangroves myself. And
drawing them is the way to understand them.
Yeah, on that side. If I sit in front of a picture, I have no idea of... it's quite complicated to draw a mangrove. You have to... There are distances, there is a lot of superpositions, overlaps. They have this crazy way of working. And it was also nice to draw them after the lianas, because they also grow in patterns, but they're very different. So all those questions, like, you kind of get to understand something about those environments when drawing in those environments.
Yeah. Is there a kind of activism in that? Just out of curiosity? At the moment, in our Western culture, but I think everywhere around the world, it's finally becoming a global understanding and conversation, where specifically these kind of ecological studies that are very specific and very vulnerable. The mangrove is in big trouble all along the Caribbean coast, because it's often not considered to be a beautiful coastline plant, but it does indeed stop tidal problems, overflowing. It's a crucial part of an ecosystem, and you're working very closely with it, very dedicatedly with it, and bringing it back also to people who have never seen, specifically smelled a mangrove, because it's a very specific smell also.
Yeah, the reason for which I start working on these subjects normally has to do with understanding the relevance of it. So that's why I start, in principle. I start understanding that something is relevant for the ecosystem, and it's normally fragile. And then I see if there is a potential for drawing. Some things are relevant for the environment, but they are not very appealing for me for drawing, so I do try sometimes, but it doesn't work. In the case of mangroves, it did. But I have also experiences where I go to a place I think is a super subject, and then the drawings don't come out very interestingly, and I have to let go because I move in between both. For me, both things are equally important in a way. But yeah, of course, for me, I especially the way the world is going and the amount of people claiming to be an activist, I kind of try to avoid mentioning it, but that's actually my interest. Okay. It comes from there, for caring. Yeah. And I think also that's why I thought your proposal was interesting, because it has to do a lot with listening. Because the way when you draw these things, you really have to understand them, and in a way they have a agency. So it's not only me. There is something there that kind of, I don't know.
And that's dormant or not?
Yeah, probably dormant, or it has some form of it has something that I feel the drawings are not complete, and they are mine, of course. I'm there to enhance it, but there is something there that you have to look.
And that's the listening part.
And that's the listening part.
And doing it time and time again, because there is an incredible repetition in your work. It's very dedicated, somehow.
It opens up. I mean, you do one drawing, you think you're not able to do it because it's so complicated. You do it another day and it's a bit better. Third day, by the number 10, you kind of understood how they grow, how they do it, why they do it, where they will go.
Hmm. I think, if I remember correctly, in one of your publications, there's call it a story about a certain part of a rock where 4 different scenarios were created for it, to understand it better, to listen to it, I suppose. But becoming, claiming an agency in how that specific part of the ecosystem could change. So one was covering it up, the other one was sealing it off completely, and one was leaving it. Am I remembering something?
Yeah,
Could you explain it? Sorry.
Yeah, so they do these things a lot in ecological studies. So they create little small scenarios where things can be one way, the other, or the other. So the one you're remembering, it's also in Panama, in Punta Culebra, which is also a marine station. And they have the bare rock as it is, as it would be if nothing happened. They have another little closure, they call it, and that's covering it with shade, with a little roof. They have another one with a cage, so they keep predators out. And they have one other with keeping the predators and the light out. So they see all the different scenarios, what will happen if. But it's quite common, and I quite like, that's why I like to work with ecologists, because they create
these little worlds, they change little things.
Yeah, and and changes a lot, actually.
Yeah, you see it.
I see it. I did a series of drawings also of those 4 scenarios.
Is this a sort of heightened kind of listening? Because in a way, I'm interested in that sort of that position then that the scientist, and you as well then as an artist who's there, take in proactively changing that ecosystem, even if it's just this really small part. I find that
it's tiny.
Intriguing.
Yeah, it's tiny. Huh?
I'm sure it's tiny.
Yeah, I mean, for me it hurt. Like, even I work with sponges and I have to cut them, and for me it was a disaster. But they do it a lot, and they do it in larger scales.
Yeah.
But I think it's justified in their case, it's justified by their objectives.
Do conversations go in this direction ever, or no?
I mean, sometimes. But it's clear for them. I mean, it's not that they haven't thought it through. I mean, they know how much they need. They don't overcut. I mean, it's not that they go crazy.
No, of course. I mean, I would imagine not.
It's kind of control, and they do the minimum that they think it's necessary, and it's important what they do.
So you brought a track where we hear them. Can you say a little bit about it, or do you want to say it afterwards?
I mean, I just give a little introduction. I joined this last year, actually, an expedition in the sea with Toro Ocean. So I embarked a research vessel for a month, and what you're going to hear is some sound that I did record myself.
La última hora. Esperando la hora de su trabajo.
Está cute la rosetina.
Es cute, ¿no? On va y à la couche là, ouais. Ah non, on va s'arrêter 680, on va s'arrêter à 700. Pour 20 mètres. Tu veux t'arrêter maintenant? Non, on fait. Je pense qu'on va rigoler à la remontée, mais après. Ça, j'en ai une. On va arrêter de mettre. C'est la manie.
So here we have sort of the conversations together and the reality of the boat. Nostalgic a little bit? or no?
Nostalgic? Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know.
it was amazing. Yeah, sure.
Do you dream a lot, actually? So the question just occurred to me. Do you dream a lot of these
I dream
these
a lot.
journeys that you take?
Yeah, especially in this one, there was some of them more than the others. But this one was intense. because
Why is that?
we were at sea, open sea, 1 month. No internet, no phone. So it is quite powerful to be at sea. And yeah, it was crazy. It was really intense. So I dream a lot, really a lot.
About it still, or specifically then?
Well, now funnily enough, I'm transcribing the notes for
Okay.
a book I'm writing, so it's bringing a lot of memories. Also,
The notes that you wrote, or the
Yeah.
notes? Ah, yeah, okay.
so yeah, coincidentally, I was working on that also today. So there were I was reading the dreams, and it's quite nice.
And what else are you working on?
What else am I working on? Now I have a show very soon in
Mhm.
Spain, in a place called Cerezales, in which I was working there for a couple of years, doing field works with the more connected to geology.
Mm-hmm.
I was with the geologists and then working with the environment for some time.
And we have a beautiful publication that you brought along. The wonderful thing about the listening tide, it's completely non-visual. But one of the first things we spoke about is this addendum that you put in the back. I think we should
Mention it.
give it a little bit of a shine, no?
Yeah.
So you had a project in Nice, went on for many years. You should
Yeah.
say
So
more about it.
I basically work connected to a museum called MAMAC and 2 laboratories, one in Villefranche and one in Nice. And they work with these 2 little organisms that they regenerate. One is called Botrytis, and it's
Mhm.
like colonial, and the other one is called Nematostella, and it's
Specifically 2 kinds of organisms. That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
So one lab work with one is one of the first times I work in a lab. So I'm more used to what we heard before, which is
Mhm.
being in the field.
Mm-hmm.
This was a scholarship I got to work in these 2 laboratories. That they have a very, very particular issue, which is that they regenerate. So it's biology, but it's linked to more to health studies.
Mm-hmm.
So if those little animals are quite similar to us genetically. So they're trying to see how they regenerate. They don't get sick. They don't age, actually. So they don't die, in principle. So they're trying to see how they do it.
Very attractive to science, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Yeah, so they're trying to see how those animals do it and if that eventually can be used.
And so this research is going to take place no matter what.
Yeah.
And then you as an artist, how do you come...
So I entered that.
how do you show up?
I show up, spend a lot of time. I spent basically all the pandemic there.
They invited you or you found them?
So I found I work already with the museum, with MAMAC. And when I was invited to a show there, I said that's a pity because I knew of Institute of Research in Villefranche. It's one of the oldest marine stations in Europe. So I really wanted to do work there. So we started developing anyway. So I had a show in 2019 with her at MAMAC with Hélène Ganan. And then we started developing slowly this connection. Then we got a grant. Then we linked to the other lab. So it was very, very long term.
Yeah.
We had a show last year finishing the project. Now a book that I brought here, and then the year before when I was there we had a workstation with children,
Yeah.
in which I articulated the understanding of biology through drawing. So
Yeah.
trying to kind of share with others the way I think through drawing. So that was like a workstation.
And in this workshop situation, I suppose then, we spoke about it. Drawing is listening, you know, the way you look, but also the way it sort of translates onto the page. Is that then was it sort of part of it? Because the drawings are amazing, I think. Very impressive.
Yeah, the drawings are amazing. And so the biologists would go and explain the biology,
Yeah.
and then I would articulate drawing exercises that were not actually easy.
Sure.
I wasn't trying to make the biology easy or the drawing process easy, just trying to understand the drawing is a way of thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone can actually use it. It's a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
And if you let people do it, then they do it. You just have to trust. And it was kind of funny because the teachers were scared. The professors were like, no, that's too difficult. I was like, no, that's not too difficult. Just let them do it. And the drawings are amazing.
Yeah.
It was really quite amazing.
Thank you very much, Liana. This has been super nice.
You're very welcome. I really enjoyed.
We're going to leave the listeners with, I suppose a little bit of insight into being, for 1 month, no phone, no internet, sitting on the deck of a boat. And look forward to it next time.